Hey guys, Kyle from Z1, and today we are going to get behind the age-old question of which oil do I put in my car? What better way to answer this question than to bring Motul on the scene?
Thank you, Kyle, for having me over.
You're welcome.
Let's talk some fluids for Nissan.
Okay, so today we're going to use a vehicle that I feel represents the majority of drivers in car clubs, group drives, a lot of employees here. This is our employee Josh. He has a stock 2009 370Z. It's got 120,000 miles, stock engine, a little bit of suspension work, tires. This is the drive to work 5 days a week, take it to the mountains on the weekend. I feel this is, that represents the majority here. So no oil cooler, no intakes, nothing fancy. So what do you recommend for me?
Well, actually my recommendation is exactly the oil that you brought to us today. 8100 ECO-nergy 5W30. The difference with this 5W30 with others that might have that API ILSAC profile that we spoke about some minutes ago is that this product is a lot more stable when it comes to high temperature.
Okay.
So it is a 530 still, it will give you that fuel economy benefit, but it will protect you better against oil consumption and against wear when things get hotter.
Right. Okay, so but I'm sorry to interrupt. With the Viva on these, they do tend to run hot, especially without an oil cooler.
Yeah, and this is the best way of having that sweet spot between an engine oil that will help you save some money, but that at the same time is very efficient when it comes to protection.
Okay.
And that comes from those European standards that we talked about, the ACEA, being this an A5, B5, and then all the other OEM approvals that we can see always on Motul products on the front label. So this is the perfect alternative, best of both worlds.
Okay.
Fuel economy and very good protection.
Okay.
Now say that we run bigger injectors on Josh's car. He starts, or you guys start making some tests on his car, and say we have more fuel contamination.
Right.
The richer we run, the more fuel is going to come in contact with the oil. That is a natural law. Right. That's the reason why you guys have catch cans and everything. You want to get rid of that mixture between condensation, water, and fuel byproducts. So, best way to cope with that is to go for a slightly thicker oil and an oil that has a bit more polarity, that sticks more to the components, and that's where the Sport comes. We have two different viscosities. The 5W40 Sport will be the universal application for your vehicles, having a great level of protection, but not being too thick, too viscous, in a sense that it will hamper performance.
Okay. Now you just mentioned polarity. Before we were on camera here, Nico, you're explaining to me on a whiteboard, and it made a lot of sense. So if we could put that video here. Okay.
Yeah, so that polarity is very important when it comes to talking about base oils, because it will give the friction modifiers, the anti-wear additives, an extra hand at protecting the components. So basically what you have is very, very small molecules that might look like a snake, for example, where you have a head. The head is polar and is what gets sticked to the different components. And then you have this tail that has very good affinity with the actual oil. So you will always have this orientation, this vertical orientation of the molecule, where the head is working as an anchor for the molecule and the tail is providing you with a protective shield between the parts.
Right, so, and as you explained to me, that works as basically a mattress of oil between the metal pieces to stop contact.
Exactly, to stop that metal-to-metal contact, which in turn will give you the wear that nobody wants.
Right. So now let's go back to the transmission. This is, like I said, 120,000 mile stock transmission. We'll get to the clutch later. It's an internal slave cylinder. It's standard on these, so it sees a lot of heat. But what do you recommend for transmission? For daily driver, a little higher mileage, what you got?
Well, we have here some alternatives from our line. I would say the standard package would be going with Gear 300. And as you can see, we have two products.
Why'd you bring three that look the same?
Well, they almost look like the same thing, but the formulations are quite different. So Gear 300, Gear 300 LS. You might have guessed already, LS comes from limited slip. So on your manual transmission, you want to put Gear 300.
Okay.
For the differential, if it is a limited slip differential,
This
you're going
is sport model with limited slip?
exactly. You're going to use gear 300 LS.
Okay.
Yes. And say that we have a guy that made some tunes in the engine that is now running through a lot more horsepower, more torque actually, or you have some whining in the transmission, maybe ball bearing that's saying goodbye, some wear from the ring and pinion. You have a way of increasing viscosity to cope with that, but at the same time not losing that much efficiency, and that comes from gear competition 75W140. Is your alternative for maybe a higher level of tuning, or maybe because you're trying to compensate for a potential problem with a ball bearing or ring and pinion wear.
Okay. All right, now related to that is the clutch. Like I said, it's internal slave cylinder in this clutch, so it gets hot. We typically always recommend the RBF 600 here. It's what we include with our clutch kits. You also brought this to the table. Would you like to explain the difference on those two?
Sure. I think that's very smart to do. As you know, the slave cylinder is going to be soaking up heat from both the engine and the transmission, and we all know how hard it is to change a slave cylinder when it goes bad. It's not.
All right, Nico, I don't know if you're as familiar with these. The slave cylinder is a very big problem with these cars.
Exactly.
So, yes, we know.
Having the brake fluid or clutch fluid in this case that withstands more temperature, that has a higher boiling point, and that also does not oxidize as fast as a conventional fluid is going to be less headaches, less problems down the line. Besides the thing about avoiding it boiling, having a higher boiling point on the 600, you could always go with a DOT 5.1 on the brakes. It's a street car, doesn't hit the track, doesn't need that much of a heat soaking capacity, so you can always try and stay within budget using DOT 5.1. It's still going to perform a lot better than a conventional DOT 4 from the streets.
Right, better than stock.
Better than stock, that's for sure.
Right.
So you can stick to the RBF 600 for the slave cylinder in the case of a clutch.
Right.
And then for the higher volume, you can always go with DOT 5.1. It's still going to be an upgrade versus the stock fluid.
Great. So to refresh, we have for oil, for the better than factory replacement, we have the ECO-nergy 5W30. And for the guys who are seeing more track use, I know this is what I personally run in my track car, is the Sport 5W40. Transmission, recommend the Gear 300 7590, and then in the factory VLSD, you run 300 LS 7590. Factory open diff, we would say more of the 300, not the LS.
Exactly.
Okay, and then an upgrade to that would be the Gear Competition 75W140. It's a little thicker.
Yes, it's a little thicker, but still very efficient, a lot better than a conventional synthetic 75W140.
And then in the diff, would you notice anything weird about having 140 instead of 7590?
Absolutely no.
Okay.
Absolutely no.
And then clutch, RBF 600, brake fluid 5.1, or upgrade to 600.
That is correct.
Okay.
Some news coming down the line pretty soon, but for the time being, this is the recipe.
All right, now can I ask you a question?
Sure thing.
You always hear about if you have conventional in your car, to keep it conventional. You hear people have fears of switching to synthetic. Josh, like most consumers, bought this car used. It's got 110,000 miles before this that we have no idea what was in it, how it was treated, when it was changed, nothing. It's a car that showed up, it had some oil in it, and we changed it and want to put some new oil in it. Is there any cross-compatibility issues, anything we don't know about? Are we gonna have a problem if we just go straight to one or the other?
There's not going to be any type of problem as long as we keep it safe, right? And the only way to play it safe is small, little, simple things. Have a look inside the engine. When you're changing the oil, take the cap off. Is there sludge? Do you see a lot of varnish? When you change the oil, you took the oil off, is it very, very dark? Mm-hmm. Do you see, solid materials in suspension? Well, if it looks that way, you have two alternatives. You make a flush using very good products. We have one, it's called Engine Clean. Super safe to use, doesn't affect seals. has no problems with compatibility, even if you have a DPF or a CAT installed. So that's a very good way of cleaning up an engine before you use the premium oil.
Okay.
And number 2 version, it's, I wouldn't say the most efficient one, is you shorten the oil change interval. So you use that first load of engine oil as a cleaner, you change it faster, and then you monitor how the second engine oil change is going to perform. So you have both alternatives.
Other than that, it shouldn't be any problems.
Yeah, but the most important thing is use a product that was made for flushing. Do not use diesel, do not use kerosene, do not use brake fluid, which are the regular alternatives that, you know, our dad, our grandpa used to taught us.
I have not heard that one. That's a good one.
Well, stay away from that. Yeah.
Right.
The diesel crowd will probably know what I'm talking about. Yeah, add a liter of diesel, a quart of diesel inside the engine oil, run it with it.
I've heard that one.
Don't do that. Don't do that. Use flushing products and you'll stay on the safe side.
Nico, I appreciate you taking the time to explain this to us. Like I said, I think this applies to the largest portion of our viewers. Do you have anything else you recommend to myself or to them?
Well, first thing, rely on C1 for your lubrication needs. Ask around. They know what's going on with Motul, with each recommendation. So get on the phone, get on the email, ask around first, and have a safe oil change, interval maintenance, whatever, talking to the pros.
Thank you. Well, hey, I appreciate your time, and yeah, we're happy to have you.
Thank you very much for having me over.
All right, thanks guys, we'll see you next time.